The American middle class wasn't natural. It was engineered. In one city, by one industry, and the system they built to create it now runs the entire global economy. 1914, Highland Park, Michigan. A man stands watching an assembly line roll Model T chassis past at a speed never seen before. One car every 93 minutes. Soon it would be one every 24 seconds. Henry Ford didn't just invent a faster way to build cars. He invented the economic model that would dominate the world for the next century. But this isn't about cars. It's about power. Economic power. The kind that creates classes, reshapes continents, determines wars, and exports entire ways of life. Detroit didn't just build automobiles. It built the architecture of American economic dominance, and that architecture is your world today. Here's what they never told you about Detroit, and why every part of your economic life was designed there. Let's start with the lie. The assembly line wasn't Ford's most important invention, neither was the Model T. Ford's real innovation was economic, and it changed capitalism forever. January 1914, Ford announces the $5 day. Workers at Ford plants would earn $5 for 8 hours of work, double the industry standard. The business press called him insane. Competitors predicted bankruptcy. Wall Street said he was destroying shareholder value. They were all wrong, because Ford understood something they didn't. If you pay workers enough, they become customers, not just for your products, for everything: housing, appliances, entertainment, education for their kids. The $5 day didn't create Ford employees, it created American consumers, and consumption would become the engine of everything. Think about what this actually meant. Before Ford, workers were a cost to minimize. After Ford, workers were a market to cultivate. This wasn't generosity, it was strategic genius. Once workers could afford cars, Ford didn't need to find new markets. He created one, right there in Detroit. And that market grew into the most powerful consumer economy in history. Now here's where this changes everything. The assembly line didn't just make cars cheaper, it made them identical, standardized, which sounds boring until you realize what it enabled. Interchangeable parts, simplified repairs, national distribution, financing models that made ownership accessible. Every element of mass production created infrastructure far beyond automobiles. Ford wasn't just building cars, he was building the template for modern industrial capitalism, and every other industry noticed. Appliances, electronics, food processing, construction. Every sector adopted Ford's methods. The assembly line became the defining metaphor of American productivity: efficiency, scale, standardization. These weren't just manufacturing principles, they were economic doctrine. By 1920, Detroit wasn't making cars. It was exporting an economic philosophy. Nations that adopted it prospered. Nations that didn't fell behind. The assembly line became a weapon of economic competition, and America was decades ahead of everyone else. But Detroit didn't just build products, it built geography. Before the automobile, American cities were dense, compact. You lived near work because distance meant time. The automobile changed that calculation completely. Suddenly you could live 10 miles from work, 20, 30. Distance became irrelevant. American cities exploded outward. Suburbs, developments. Housing tracts built around the assumption that every family would own a car. Multiple cars, one for work, one for errands, one for the kids when they turned 16. The suburb wasn't enabled by the automobile, it was designed around it. And this is where the system locks in, because suburban sprawl created entirely new markets: lawnmowers, washing machines, bigger refrigerators because you shopped weekly, not daily, home entertainment because you couldn't walk to theaters. The suburb was a consumption machine, and the automobile was the key. But there's a deeper layer. The suburb was ideological. It represented the American dream made physical: home ownership, privacy, space, independence, and central to that dream was the car in the driveway. 2 cars, 3 cars. The automobile became the symbol of American prosperity, and Detroit became the city that manufactured prosperity itself. So what happens when you make prosperity a product? You export it. Post-World War II, Europe and Japan in ruins. American factories untouched, American industrial capacity at peak, and Detroit at the center. The question wasn't whether America would rebuild the world, it was how. The answer involved a lot of cars. The Marshall Plan, $13 billion to rebuild Europe. But here's what the textbooks skip. That aid came with conditions. European nations had to open markets to American goods, adopt American business practices, integrate their economies with American capital, and buy American products. Guess what became the symbol of European recovery? American automobiles, Fords, Chevrolets, Chryslers rolling through rebuilt cities, signaling prosperity, progress, partnership with America. The car wasn't just transportation, it was a political statement. We're in the American sphere now. We've adopted the American model. And it worked. Western European economies integrated with American markets, adopted American industrial methods, created automotive industries modeled on Detroit. The economic architecture Detroit pioneered became the foundation of the post-war Western order. Without Detroit, there is no Western alliance as we know it. But Detroit's influence went beyond selling cars. It exported an entire system. And that system required infrastructure. The Interstate Highway System. Authorized 1956, 41,000 miles of high-speed roads connecting every major city. Largest public works project in history. Designed explicitly to serve the automobile. Eisenhower sold it as national defense. Move troops. Evacuate cities in nuclear war. But the real purpose was economic. Highways enabled suburban expansion, long-distance trucking, national retail chains. The entire geography of American commerce was rebuilt around automotive transportation. This wasn't just American policy. It became the global standard. Nations that wanted to modernize built highways, developed automotive industries, suburbanized their cities. The Detroit model became synonymous with development itself. If you wanted to be modern, you built like America. And America built around the car. Now here's what this created. An economic system where prosperity required constant mobility, where growth meant more cars, more roads, more suburbs, more consumption. Detroit hadn't just built an industry, it had built a model of economic organization that made the automobile indispensable. You couldn't opt out. The system required it. And here's the part that connects everything. Detroit didn't create products or infrastructure. It created a class, the American middle class. And that class became the foundation of American economic and political power. Before Detroit, America had rich and poor, industrialists and laborers. The gap was massive, permanent. But the $5 day changed that. Factory workers could buy houses, save money, send kids to college. They weren't workers anymore, they were stakeholders. And stakeholders behave differently. They vote for stability. They oppose radical change. They consume. They invest in the system because the system works for them. The middle class wasn't an accident of Detroit's success. It was the mechanism that stabilized American capitalism and made it self-reinforcing. By 1960, the majority of Americans identified as middle class. Home ownership exceeded 50%. Car ownership was near universal. This wasn't just prosperity. It was a political achievement, because a society of middle-class consumers doesn't revolt. It votes, it participates, it defends the system that gave it prosperity. Detroit was the factory that produced that class, not just through wages, through the entire ecosystem of consumption and mobility and suburban life that the automobile enabled. The middle class was Detroit's most important export, and it became America's most powerful strategic asset. But let's talk about what happened when the model broke, because Detroit's decline tells you as much about American power as its rise. 1970s. Oil shocks, Japanese imports, fuel efficiency. Suddenly, Detroit's big gas-guzzling sedans looked obsolete. Toyota, Honda, Datsun, smaller, cheaper, more efficient. American consumers started buying foreign cars. Detroit panicked. The big three, Ford, GM, Chrysler, had dominated so long they'd stopped innovating. They assumed supremacy was permanent, that American consumers would always buy American. They were wrong. By the 1980s, Japanese automakers weren't just competing. They were winning. Better quality, lower prices, higher reliability. The Detroit model, once unbeatable, was being outperformed by companies that had learned from Detroit and improved on it. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Detroit didn't fall due to external forces. It fell due to complacency. The same companies that revolutionized production had become bureaucratic, inefficient, resistant to change. They'd spent decades as monopolies and forgotten how to compete. The result? Plant closures, layoffs, urban decay. Detroit, the city that built the American century, became synonymous with decline. Abandoned factories, depopulated neighborhoods, bankruptcy. The fall was brutal, total, and it served as a warning about what happens when economic dominance breeds complacency. But here's what people miss about Detroit's decline. The model didn't die. It just moved. The Interstate Highway System still exists. Suburbs still define American geography. Consumer culture still drives the economy. The middle class, though squeezed, still shapes politics. All the structures Detroit created remained. They just weren't producing prosperity for Detroit anymore. The automotive industry globalized. Factories moved south to Mexico, to China. But the fundamental model, mass production for mass consumption, persisted. Detroit had created a system so robust, it survived Detroit's own collapse. And this tells you something crucial about economic power. It's not about maintaining dominance in specific industries. It's about creating structures that persist, even after you've lost competitive advantage. Detroit lost the car industry, but the economic architecture it pioneered still shapes global capitalism. Modern capitalism runs on a system built in one city, even though that city fell. Let me show you how this plays out today, in your life, right now. You probably don't drive a car made in Detroit, maybe Toyota, Honda, Tesla. But the financing model you used, Detroit pioneered it. The suburban geography you navigate, Detroit designed it. The consumer culture defining your economic behavior, Detroit mass-produced it. The interstate carries goods you buy from Amazon. Suburbs house the middle class that determines elections. The expectation that prosperity means home ownership and car ownership and consumption. That's all Detroit. The factory closed. The model remains. This is Detroit's real legacy, not the cars. The system. An economic order where growth requires consumption, where middle-class prosperity stabilizes capitalism, where infrastructure serves mobility, and mobility serves markets. That's what Detroit built, and it's still the foundation of American economic power. Now let's connect this to American dominance, because Detroit's story isn't unique. It's a pattern. The atomic bomb created strategic dominance through monopoly, then through architecture that persisted after monopoly ended. Detroit created economic dominance through innovation, then through structures that persisted after competitive advantage faded. The pattern repeats. American power isn't about permanent superiority in any domain. It's about creating systems that become indispensable, the dollar as reserve currency, internet architecture, global supply chains, financial markets. Each started with American innovation and became infrastructure everyone depends on. Detroit did this for industrial capitalism, created the template, exported it globally. And even as Detroit declined, the template remained. Other nations built automotive industries, but they built them using principles Detroit established: the $5 day, mass production, consumer financing, suburban markets, all Detroit innovations, all now global standards. This is how economic empires work. You don't need to maintain dominance forever, you just need to set the rules. And once the rules are set, changing them is almost impossible, because everyone built their economies around those rules. So what does this mean for you, for the world right now? It means the economic geography of your life was designed in Detroit a century ago. The assumption that you'll own a car, live in a suburb, commute to work, shop at stores accessible only by highway. That's Detroit's legacy. It means the consumer culture defining modern capitalism was mass-produced in Detroit. The idea that prosperity equals consumption, that growth requires constantly increasing demand, that a healthy economy is one where people buy more stuff. Detroit didn't invent consumerism, but it industrialized it, made it the engine of economic growth. It means the middle class, the political force shaping American democracy, was manufactured in Detroit, not just through wages. through an entire ecosystem of consumption and ownership and mobility that made workers into stakeholders. That transformation from labor to capital, from worker to consumer, that's Detroit's most enduring achievement. And here's the part they don't want you to think about too hard. Detroit's model is breaking, again, not because of Japanese competition, because of physics, climate change, resource constraints. The entire economic model built around suburban sprawl and automotive transportation and constantly increasing consumption is running into physical limits. Electric cars don't solve this. They just change what you're burning. The problem isn't the fuel, it's the system. An economy designed around infinite growth on a finite planet. Detroit's genius was creating a model that generated prosperity through consumption. Detroit's curse is that the model can't run forever. But changing it, almost impossible, because the entire infrastructure of American life is built around it. Suburbs can't function without cars. Highways can't be unmade. Supply chains can't be reorganized overnight. The system Detroit created is so deeply embedded, it's become nearly impossible to replace. This is the final lesson of Detroit. Economic power creates structures that outlast the power itself, and those structures, once built, resist change even when change becomes necessary. So let's bring this back to Highland Park. 1914, Henry Ford watching that assembly line. One car every 93 minutes. Soon, one every 24 seconds. What was he actually building? Not cars. A system, an economic order where prosperity meant consumption, where consumption meant production, where production meant employment, where employment meant consumption. A closed loop that generated wealth, created middle classes, stabilized capitalism, and exported American influence globally. For 40 years, that system was unstoppable. Detroit was the capital of American economic power, the factory of the middle class, the exporter of the American dream. And even as Detroit fell, the model persisted, spread globally, became the foundation of modern capitalism. Today, Detroit's legacy is everywhere. In suburbs, highways, shopping malls, financing models, consumer culture, the middle class. The entire architecture of modern economic life bears Detroit's fingerprints. The factories closed, the system remains. This is how economic empires are built, not through conquest, through innovation that becomes infrastructure, through models that become indispensable, through systems that persist long after the innovators have fallen. Detroit built the American century not by dominating forever, but by creating structures everyone else had to adopt. And those structures, still shaping the world, still defining what prosperity looks like, still determining how capitalism functions, the city declined. The empire it built lives on. But here's what keeps strategists awake at night. The system built in Detroit made America powerful, but it may not survive the century it created. The model that generated middle-class prosperity for 80 years is colliding with limits it was never designed to encounter. And when systems this fundamental break, they don't just fail, they reshape everything. That assembly line Ford watched in 1914 wasn't just building cars, it was building your world, the suburbs you live in, the commute you take, the consumer culture you participate in, the middle-class expectations you hold, all of it engineered in one city, all of it designed to serve one industry, all of it now the foundation of global capitalism. Detroit built the American century. For better or worse, and we're still living in the world it created. Even as that world approaches limits Detroit never imagined. That's the legacy. That's the warning. That's how one city built an empire, and why even in ruins its system still runs everything.